Royal Privileges by Starkey Shy. This is a commissioned piece featuring tickling. It was another beautiful day in the bustling city of Canterlot. Anybody who was anybody was out having a wonderful time, enjoying the thriving city's high-class culture and rich atmosphere, soaking up the delights many people could only dream of acquiring. However, for the two royal sisters, it was the same old routine. When one is exposed to the constantly classy lifestyle day in, day out, it's easy to find it tiresome. Sometimes, one would even envy the lower classes. It was easier for them to do certain things they would take for granted, whether it be look messy, drop a foul word or two, or, in the case of the two regal sisters, enjoy a bit of erotic entertainment. There would be one nasty outcry if the princesses were ever caught doing anything uncouth. The judging eyes of all those self-proclaimed ladies and gentlemen who were so self-absorbed in their extravagant ways, they had long pretended they don't even have bodily functions anymore. All first world problems aside, royalty did have its perks. As hard as it was for the two most public faces in all of Equestria to do things with subtlety, with enough funds and enough connections, anything is possible. Any number of lucrative pursuits were open to the insanely wealthy, and in the case of the sisters, their quirks lie in the world of tickling. Luna and Celestia had always been thick as thieves. From the age blood started flowing to their nethers, they told each other their darkest secrets. Blood runs thicker than water, and after finding out they both had the same insatiable love of tickling, they got into it at every chance they had. Whenever their parents were out, whenever it was dark and the lights were down, whenever there was a pillow to muffle the giddy squeals, the girls traded favors with one another, taking turns at tickling each other wild. But alas, as the years progressed, they got bored of one another. Not that they stopped caring about each other or their fetishes, but they knew each other like the back of their hands, and there was no excitement to it anymore. Every little touchy spot on their bodies was long found and exploited for hours on end. Tickling each other now was simply just a means to pass the time without boring themselves to death. And as time passed, the both of them inheriting the throne and all of its wealth, they thought it was due time to search for fresh meat. With a few bits thrown here and there, a handful of posters were created and pasted in the more seedy places of Canterlot. Tickled for cash, they said. Money for each hour spent under titillation. Money enough to stop working for the next few years and sit back and relax. And lo and behold, it was a mere day before someone saw it and took genuine interest in the proposal. A girl by the name of Sweetie Belle, who was all grown up and struggling to find her way in the real world as an out-of-work singer. The poster made an offer she could not refuse, and though she had some initial reluctance, she thought it was only tickling, nothing bad at all. But Sweetie would soon find out that what the sisters had planned was a bit more insidious and unbearable in nature than what she could have ever initially thought. Luna and Celestia were livid with excitement. One of their many eyes and ears over the city had reported to them that a poster was taken. This could only mean one thing: that someone had taken the poster out of interest and was on their way now, possibly unwitting as to what was truly coming. The thought of someone simply ripping the poster off the wall as an act of vandalism didn't occur at all to them. After living such a classy life, the acts of the common folk were often mysterious and without cause from their perspective. So, with only this tidbit of information, they changed clothes, dressing more casually and loosely, and made their way to their house of tickles, an otherwise small, unremarkable, and plain-looking building, a conveniently short walk away from the palace. Naturally, eager as they were, they arrived with a plentiful amount of time to spare. Kicking off their shoes, they entered and laid back on one of the two pieces of regular furniture in the house. A sofa, the other being a king-size bed. The rest of the house was filled with cupboards and drawers chock full of everything they would ever need for their particular delight. Oils, brushes, ties, feathers, and a myriad of other objects that could be used to scratch, itch, and tickle in dozens of different ways, some more obtuse than others. Aside from the treasure trove of chests scattered about, the main room was dedicated to different bondage devices. One was a sizable, cushy-looking chair laced with buckles and straps, with a pair of medieval stockades firmly bolted onto the end, all the way down to little pieces of rope that could be used to restrain one's toes to keep the soles taut, if the sisters were feeling devious enough. It was a unanimous decision that they would use that device first before testing out their other kinky setups. Like the tiny dark room one could be placed in, effectively making the victim unable to see or hear what was happening, while their sensitive feet jutted out of the wall, vulnerable to any forms of teasing. Or the rack, which gently stretched the willing participant out enough to make them perfect for an extended upper body tickling. After double and triple checking everything was ready to be used for the very first time, Luna and Celestia resigned themselves to the sofa yet again to discuss the intricacies of what was to come. "Who do you think our first victim will be?" Luna asked as she twiddled her thumbs to pass the time. "Will they be male or female, I wonder?" "What do you think, Tia?" Celestia let out a yawn and stretched before replying. "I have no idea, and honestly, I don't even mind. We can break just about anyone into tears of laughter, I bet. It doesn't even matter who. So long as someone laughs today, I'll be content. Though it would be nice if it was someone pretty with nice feet." As if her prayers were answered by a power even higher than her own, there was a musical knock at the door, and in entered a beautiful young Kemp girl, looking adorably nervous. All the sisters could do was grin and hide their malicious intent. Oh, Princess, I'm sorry, I must have entered the wrong room." She showed the two the poster she had taken to try to explain. "I'll just be going, sorry to interrupt." Before she could back out of the door, Celestia put her hand up, commanding her to stop. "Not so fast. We believe you have the right place. That poster is right. If you are here for that." She tilted her head to the side. Sweetie Belle chuckled nervously. She didn't expect to be tickled by the princesses themselves, let alone be paid for it. "So, you two will tickle me and then pay me for it?" Sweetie Belle asked, still suspicious. She was still not sure if this was a trick or not. "That is indeed correct," Luna nodded. "Now, we will have to restrain you, if you don't mind." Sweetie Belle shook her head, thinking about all the money she could earn instead of agonizing tickles to come. "Very good. Now, please follow us and we will set you up." The two walked towards the stocks. The young unicorn followed, already chuckling nervously. Both Luna and Celestia were loving the fact that the girl looked shocked to see them. But then again, who wouldn't be? Especially given the circumstances. People's mouths were agape even when they walked down the street. "I'm afraid we didn't catch your name," inquired Celestia as she prepared the chair and the stocks. Sweetie Belle," the girl answered nervously, hesitating a bit as if she knew that they would know who she was. Luna excitedly spoke up as a light bulb went off in her head. "Rarity, sister, it's been quite a long time. Neither of us recognize you at all. There's something to be said about doing something with someone you know already. All the more fun, I say." Celestia nodded in agreement, obviously fixated on making sure everything was ready to dive right into. With a sigh of satisfaction, she finished the preparation. Celestia patted the chair, locking eyes with Sweetie Belle before beckoning her over. The girl looked quite cautious, a fact neither sister seemed to fully appreciate. For them, this was just another day's playtime. Sweetie bit her lip before making her way over to the chair and took one last breath before sitting on the chair and placing her ankles in the leg holes of the stockades. "Don't worry, my dear. It's only tickling. No pain, no marks, and a lump sum of royal money at the end after you were treated by none other than the princesses themselves," reassured Celestia, attempting to ease the girl's obviously worried expression while Luna closed the stocks over Sweetie's ankles. After locking it, the two sisters exchanged a quick grin. They knew her fate was sealed now. The waiting was finally over, and they licked their lips in anticipation of the hours to come. They worked in tandem, securing the rest of the straps on the chair, trying to get her nice and restrained, so she wouldn't strain or injure herself, before kneeling together in front of the stockades, gazing upon Sweetie's shoe-laden feet. Sweetie wore a regular pair of sneakers, surprising Celestia and Luna. The choice seemed unfitting for the sister of rarity, but maybe the fancy lifestyle was something forced upon her as opposed to a choice of her own. They simultaneously shrugged before each pulling off a shoe. One layer to go. They were now looking at Sweetie Belle's socks, pink and purple striped socks that went up to the knee. For a moment, they watched Sweetie's feet scrunch in her socks, flexing the fabric, before they couldn't take the anticipation anymore and slowly peeled them off, teasingly as possible. And as the last bit of cloth made its way over Sweetie's toes, all their wishes came true at once. If the footwear wasn't a sign that she was Rarity's sister, her creamy, unblemished skin certainly was. Before their eyes lay two of the softest, moderately sized feet they had ever had the pleasure of laying eyes on, all the way down to the slender toes and high ladylike arch. They sat back and admired their plaything, watching the toes splay in their newfound freedom as they cooled in the room's moderate climate. They took a sniff of her socks to check if everything was as it seemed, almost like checking if milk was still in date. They took a sniff of her socks to check if everything was as it seemed, almost like checking if milk was still in date. And they were. Her socks smelled fresh apart from the absolute faintest smell of sweat and perfume. The toes were not allowed to ride for long, of course, before the devious sisters got to work in tying them back to the stockades. As their fingers fumbled against Sweetie's silky soft little toes, she started to giggle already in her pitch-perfect musical voice, which was basically a symphony to the ears of the sisters. It was all too perfect. After her toes were properly restrained and wriggling pitifully against their bonds, Luna ran a finger up Sweetie's arch, eliciting another stream of giggles as she tried her hardest to wrinkle her soles and failed miserably. They were taut as the skin on a drum. She would not be able to seek relief from the torment that way, and the princesses cemented that grim fact by cleaning the sock fluff from between her toes, causing ever more giggling. Another sadistic grin was displayed by Luna and Celestia as they tauntingly wriggled their fingers in plain view of Sweetie Belle's eyes, before slowly lowering them towards her bare, vulnerable feet, trying their very best to make the girl's skin crawl. Their fingers were but an inch away from her skin, and she tried her best to clench her fingers, toes, and entire body to lessen the oncoming assault. The sisters had already agreed to mix things up a bit, and after 5 minutes of soul and toe tickling with their manicured fingernails, they decided to give her a quick respite, considering the girl's obvious sensitivity. Neither princess expected her to fall into silent laughter so quickly, but even still, their mercy was limited. Celestia decided that she needed to make the session last as long as possible, and offered the tormented girl a few sips of water. Luna took care of the tears that flowed from her eyes during the session, keeping her as comfortable as possible. After she had finished drying Sweetie's face, Luna posed a question she hoped would be answered with an affirmative. "Do you still wish to continue?" Luna questioned as she heaved over a large chest full of toys for round 2. Sweetie Belle gave a silent nod before Celestia subtly took position behind the chair. Luna knew what for. While they both loved all the tickled spots on the body, Celestia enjoyed the upper body more and was more inclined to eventually show some mild mercy. whereas Luna gravitated towards the feet and wasn't as likely to stop her cravings from taking control of her decisions. Celestia began lightly prodding and poking at Sweetie Belle's rib to pass the time until Luna decided what tool to use. There were just so many wonderful things. Luna didn't know where to start. She decided to start with some fine-tipped paintbrushes and work her way up. After seeing what Luna had as her weapon of choice, Celestia started to dig her fingers into Sweetie Belle's rib some more, which made the chortle ramp up again. Just not to the extent of earlier. But that was quickly averted when the tiny little brushes started sliding up and down her soles. It was a bit different this time though. These brushes create a different sensation. Sure, they tickled, but as Luna was aware, they also created a light, wispy, pleasant sensation, which caused Sweetie to let out the occasional between bouts of laughter. It was more deceit from Luna's end than purposeful pleasure. She knew if she derived something from it now, she would agree to even more tickling. That, and there was a twist to the tools. Each tier brush had a minor magical enchantment that was the catalyst of the teasing, yet pleasurable sensation that seemed to make the nerves from the sole of her feet affect the ones in her loins. The more the specific brush tickled, the stronger the sexual effect would be. Luna continued to lovingly stroke the buttery soft arches and toes with her brush, as Celestia kneaded her sides, wishing she got her to strip off her top before being strapped down. It was a good 15 minutes before the assault on her nervous system ended. Another quick drink was offered, as was another query as to whether she wished to continue or not. Luna knew she was curious where this was going to go now. The erotic side of the teasing was too much, even if it all tickled like hell. Before they continued, they went about getting the rest of her clothes off, save for her undergarments. Celestia didn't want Luna to have all the fun. Even Sweetie Belle's toes were untied momentarily for Luna to massage oil into them. Her toes splayed in relief at the feeling as it soothed her tingling nerves, though the sisters imagined it didn't help cool her nethers. Luna was quite apt at massaging too. Her hands deftly squeezed and rubbed over the girl's warm, sweaty feet, causing Sweetie Belle to finally relax a little, even coaxing out a moan of pleasure. Soon enough, her feet were slick and tied back to the stockades. The oil itself had no magical qualities, per se. It simply compounded the effect the magic brushes would have on her already deadly sensitive feet. Both sisters were in position again, dying to continue. This time, Luna had 2 full-size hairbrushes with soft, yet still surprisingly rigid fibers. Not only were these going to send the girl into hysterics, but Luna knew she would only be able to take so much more before something more erotic happened. Sweetie Belle, still ignorant to the machinations at hand, slammed her eyes shut as Celestia's hands resumed their place on her upper body, and the brushes were set against her awfully ticklish feet. Luna scraped the brush against Sweetie's now moist soles with renewed vigor, trying her best to make her squeal as Celestia took care of the rest of her body. Celestia's fingers wiggled in between her ribs, only to slide back up her body and scratch deeply in her shaven armpits, which really made the girl scream to the high heavens in her angelic voice. Her fingers slid around oh so easily, now that Sweetie had started to sweat so much. On Luna's end, however, the brushes were having their intended after effects. It wasn't long at all before the rough tickling caused the magical effects to kick in, causing Sweetie to moan heavily between gales of forced laughter. As the bristle scraped over a sweet spot, Sweetie couldn't handle anymore and succumbed to an intense orgasm. As she cried out in pure ecstasy, the sisters exchanged smiles before continuing to tickle her through the waves of pleasure, only stopping once it had subsided. Celestia felt Sweetie's body tighten as the waves of pleasure washed over her, watched her body jolt in her bonds. For Luna, she watched the soft skin on Sweetie's feet crinkle, her toes scrunched in a mock attempt at lessening the sensations overcoming her nervous system. There was a moment of silence before Sweetie coughed out an adorable apology. like she had done something wrong. Celestia simply shook her head. There is nothing to be sorry about. All part of the fun, cooed Celestia, trying to lull her into more tickling, which was exactly what Luna was going to question her about. It has been 1 hour. Do you wish to continue? The money per hour was undeniably good, but not so much it would make Sweetie content to quit already. She nodded in response, obviously keen on making enough money to relax for a while after this ordeal. Luna and Celestia rummaged through the cabinets in the other room and found what they were looking for: bottles of maple syrup. Only the finest quality for sisters of such distinction and class. They hurried back to their victim, popped open the lids, and let the sweet nectar run down her soles. Sweetie shuddered for a second, then seemed to grow accustomed to the sensation. All the oil was long gone due to her sweating and Luna's brushing, so there was no risk of combining the two liquids. The sweat, however, they didn't bother wiping off. It all added to the flavor. The sisters stuck out their tongues in Sweetie's direction to give a hint at their intent, before leaning down and slurping at her punished feet. It didn't feel nearly as ticklish, and almost soothing in a way, but it still tickled enough to cause giggles. Celestia took long, slow licks, while Luna was lapping at them with wild abandon. At the rate they were going, it wasn't long before all the syrup had been slurped off, and Luna nibbled at her toes and licked between them, searching for more of the substance, causing Sweetie to shriek at the novelty of the sensation. Celestia, however, was more content to sit back and watch her sister go, lazily drawing figure eights on Sweetie's foot to try and pass the time. In all, it took 10 minutes before they had finished with their afternoon snack, leaving Sweetie's soles coated in saliva, her toes wiggling as she felt the wetness between them. Luna kept licking until she was broken out of her concentration by Celestia, who beckoned her into the other room. Luna looked at her sister, wondering why she was interrupted. I was thinking about how perfect she is, Celestia whispered, soft feet, insanely ticklish, and a gorgeous laugh. Well, it made me think. Do we need anyone else? What are you suggesting, Tia? We keep her here forever? Luna asked anxiously. Sure, it is in our power to do so. We have the resources to get away with it, and the power to keep everyone silent. But maybe she'll be inclined to keep coming back. You don't know. If she stayed this long, maybe she'll come back of her own free will. Celestia shrugged. We'll just see. We still have about 15 minutes left before we make any dire decisions. Do you have any plans for what's next? Luna shook her head. We're heading up to the finale now, providing she doesn't agree to even more time. Though, I don't think she could honestly take much more of this. So it's unlikely, though it's never certain. As you said, it's possible she's getting something out of this. Or maybe it's all just torture, and we're making stuff up to suit our own desires. Either way, just in case it is the end, we need to end it with a bang. Luna paused, peeking her head around the corner, making sure Sweetie wasn't getting bored. Let's really drive her nuts this time. We need to see if she finally cracks and decides to keep on lapping it up. Celestia nodded, and they made their way back out, wondering what they could do to ramp up the tickling enough to cause Sweetie to finally break. The sisters had finished discussing their plans and were sitting down rummaging through the chests for the final round. Celestia had found a handful of little blunt metal claws that she could use to put on the ends of her fingers for deeper tickling, as well as a vibrator to drive Sweetie to one final orgasm for her own pleasure. Though the sisters knew that being on the edge of orgasm also heightened one's sense of touch. Luna's pick, however, was 12 electric toothbrushes and 2 tiny free-clawed back scratchers. Sure, she didn't have that many arms, but she planned to use the brushes magically. Their tools chosen, they resumed their place after giving the girl one last drink of water. Unbeknownst to their victim, the water had an enchantment that fortified the drinker's endurance, She had lasted longer so far than she usually would, though it still wasn't completely infallible. Eventually, enough would be enough. Celestia removed the last 2 pieces of skimpy clothing, which were soaked with wetness of multiple varieties anyway, rendering Sweetie naked, who seemed too exhausted to be bothered debating it. She firmly set the vibrator against her clit and turned it on medium, a good enough start to get the juices flowing yet again. Luna already had her 12 brushes levitating, ready to seek out the most sensitive places on Sweetie's feet on their own newfound sentient merit, while she held the scratcher at the ready. Of course, to build suspense, they ever so slowly lowered their implements down to her teased flesh, causing Sweetie to tense up with whatever strength was left. And then the sensations that struck her again. She could feel Celestia's evil claws stroking her sides and under her arms, scratching more firmly than before, going everywhere she didn't want them to, as the vibrator did its job. That alone was enough to cause her to scream, but it all paled compared to what was happening to her poor feet. Each of the electric toothbrushes had picked a spot. There was one whirring between each of her sweaty little toes, while the other 4 were spread across her heels and arches. They moved around and out of the way whenever Luna's 2 devious scratchers made the long journey down the entirety of her foot, tormentingly slow, each of the prongs giving a deep muscle tickling to her soles while leaving a faint red marked trail. It wasn't all hard enough to hurt, but Luna knew the tickling was maddening. Both princesses were in the zone, entranced in their tasks. Sweetie's first orgasm came at 5 minutes, and was powerful enough to make her strain against her bonds and cry out in pleasure amongst the gale-forced laughter, which put opera singers to shame. Celestia took a second to set the vibrator on its highest setting before they resumed. What followed was 20 minutes of noiseless tickling. Sweetie's body had given up fighting, and the laughter had lost its volume. She only jolted a bit if the scratcher hit somewhere especially sensitive, or Celestia used her fingers to scratch inside her belly button. Another orgasm was squeezed out at the 40-minute mark, signaled by whispery moans. As there was only 20 minutes left, the sisters picked up pace, but it seemed to have no obvious effect, save for Sweetie losing bladder control and wetting herself, which wasn't even noticed by the sisters. With 10 minutes left on the clock, it appeared that Sweetie had finally passed out due to one final orgasm, even more powerful than the last 2, probably due to Celestia's fingers wandering to her nipples. Not even her toes were scrunching at the sensations anymore, nor were her eyes open. They got their money's worth nonetheless, and kept idly tickling her while they masturbated furiously, finally allowing themselves to release. After they regained composure, Luna took a photograph of Sweetie's still restrained feet in their post-tickling state, covered in red marks and sweat, before they untied her and carried her to a warm bath. She seemed to come to briefly as the princesses took gentle, loving care of her, washing her hair and everything, but she quickly closed her eyes again from fatigue, the warm, soapy water relaxing her too deeply to keep her eyes open. She would have felt heavenly if she could process it still in the afterglow of multiple intense orgasms. When she finally awoke again, she was laying in a luxurious bed with pillows softer than anything she had felt before. They had already had her clothes washed and dried and put back on her, minus her shoes and socks, the latter squirreled away in Princess Luna's pockets. It took a few moments before she was completely coherent again. Celestia went over to her and put her hand on her cheeks. "Hello, sweetheart. How do you feel?" she asked, motherly as can be. "Okay, I guess. I'm just tired," Sweetie responded drowsily. I think I had fun, though." Celestia smiled at the response. "Wonderful to hear. We've packed you a bag with 2 hours' pay and a few miscellaneous tokens of our appreciation for being our first and, hopefully, repeat customer," she added as she helped the tired girl to her feet. Sweetie gasped as her feet touched the fuzzy carpet, still hypersensitive from everything they were put through. She sat back down on the edge of the bed while Luna took the socks from her pockets and slid them back on Sweetie's feet, followed by her shoes. The sisters looked at her expectantly, waiting for an answer to their proposal. Sweetie Belle looked at them, blinked a few times before giving a slight smile. "I think I'll come back," Sweetie responded. "It sure beats being poor. Though it'll be just a little bit before I can take another round of that." The last word came as she headed out the door into the evening air. She turned to give them one last wave, bidding the princesses goodbye for now, before making her way home with a small fortune in her bag. Celestia and Luna embraced each other, happy beyond reckoning that their first day went so well. After they finished their hug, Luna piped up. "I know it sounds bad, but I was almost hoping she would say no. Could you imagine it, Tia? A permanent tickled pet. We'd tickle her all day, every day. Just thinking about it makes me—" Now, sister," Celestia butted in. "Well, I'll agree, it sounds nice. I don't think we are that malicious. Though, we would have taken wonderful care of her. Oh well, we'll see how next time goes then." The sisters joined arms and left for home before turning off the lights. They planned to spend many, many more days in that room. When you're immortal, it's the little pleasures in life that get you through the ages. After years of hiding away, they had long accepted what they were: Equestria's most devious ticklers, hiding in plain sight. Hello, thank you so much for listening. This was a commission piece, and the commissioner has wished to remain anonymous. Wow, this is thick, I mean, look, I came in knowing that this was going to be about tickling, but it's still, I know why it's exciting to people and why people like it, but it's, it's still taboo to me. It's still, I can't wrap my head around it. I mean, some of the stuff in the story, I hope you liked it, by the way, but just some of the stuff that I guess turns people on in the story is just a bit much for me, as you might be able to tell from this little excerpt I cut out from the recording. I hope you enjoy that, and until next time, bye-bye. After her 2 feet were thoroughly soaked in syrup, the sisters struck out oh my god, what the fuck? Ah!